Hello everyone and welcome to SUGTalks. I'm Craig Dale, your host, and together with our special guest, we'll take a deep dive into the topics, challenges and opportunities facing SAP users today. Please make sure you do follow our podcast so you never miss any of our future episodes. I'm delighted today to be joined by Conor Riordan, UKISUG Chair, Dipti, Jakhodia, UKISUG Board Member, and Emma Chambers, also UKISUG Board Member. So welcome to all of you.
Thank you.
Hey, Craig. Delighted to be here.
Thank you, Craig. Thanks.
Oh, you're very welcome to join us because today we're going to be talking about SAP Sapphire, both in Orlando and Madrid, which we all attended. Just so I'd like to get your thoughts really on, how it went, what you learned. Now you've all had time to reflect on the announcements that came out there with regards to SAP's strategy. And just before we get into that, given that we've all travelled to the Sapphire conferences, I thought I'd ask you, what's one item you'd never travel without? Start with you, Conor, if I may.
Yeah, great question, Craig. So for me, I travel an awful lot as part of my job, and I often get a very early morning flight. So the most important for me is noise cancelling headphones. When I get on a plane, I got to get to sleep. I got to get to sleep quickly. So the go-to thing that I never travel without is my noise cancelling headphones.
Love it. I do feel you there, definitely. Dipti.
For me, it always was a book. But in the recent years, thanks to your podcast, Craig, it's become AirPods.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. Emma.
Well, I was just thinking about the trip to Madrid and holidays. I always like to go somewhere hot because I feel it's a bit of a waste of time leaving the UK and not going somewhere where it's really hot. So for me, it's got to be sunscreen, safety first, and make sure I don't burn because I burn very easily. So always factor 30 and above.
I remember seeing that on Emma on her wrist.
I like that. I mean, immediately when I got sent this, I thought, well, my sanity. But then, I thought about Wharton and Jim Gee, but for me, it's got to be my mobile. I've travelled, I've forgotten my wallet, I've forgotten belts and things like that. But as I had my mobile, I was fine. I could pay for things. I could do it. So I think it just has to be my mobile strapped to me. But okay, just to get us started, I thought we could maybe share our top line thoughts of Sapphire Orlando and Sapphire Madrid. And just before I come to you, just to share a couple of things from my perspective is, I just find it so good and great to connect and learn with the SAP community wherever we get to. I thought, SAP's trajectory remains on the same course. Get everyone on the cloud. It seems to be. We had apps, we had data, and we had a lot of AI. But I am maybe missing noise. We're not seeing that many use cases just yet, and we need to see that evidence of success. But overall, I think it gives a great platform to discuss and debate all of these elements with colleagues, friends from around the globe. So for me, that's where I got it. So, Conor, if I may come to you on that one first, please.
Yeah, I think, Craig, it was a really interesting Sapphire from, if I kind of, to sum it up for me in kind of two maybe areas. One is that AI is not a bolt-on. AI is going to be built into the application. So there was a lot of focus on AI being embedded in the process rather than being supplemental to the process. And then a second area around the Joule is this concept of omnipresent business co-pilot, and that Joule will be the face of business AI, and maybe a move away from, focusing on the applications, but more to focusing on Joule driving the business process. So there was a lot of kind of maybe futuristic concepts around how we're going to work in the future, with both Joule as being the omnipresent business co-pilot and AI built into the process. So they were kind of maybe the two key kind of focus areas that I took out of there from Orlando.
Thank you. And Dipti?
For me, I mean, having been in the SAP ecosystem for many years now, I start reflecting on the SAP's strapline. It used to be best run businesses run SAP to now bring out your best. And what really struck with me is SAP is now kind of recognizing that they cannot just be the best by themselves. They need to take all of us in the journey. So the best of breed as a suite and suite as a service, I think, is powerful for organizations and enterprises as they look at transforming.
Thank you. And Emma?
Yeah, I think just picking up on what Conor said, of course, AI, and in fact, I think the new buzzword of 25 seems to be agentic AI, was all across the conference, and to pick up on what Conor said there about it being omnipresent, but also not just in the SAP suite, but talking about expanding it out into other applications. So there was a lot about what that meant for not just user experience, but for customer experience as people move away from traditional user interface to natural language, prompt-led interactions, but also what it can mean for insights that you can pull out and what it can mean for productivity gains. But on the flip side of that, and while we talked a lot about innovation, I think there was also, with the talk about a lot of new partnerships for innovation, I think we've been looking for some time around understanding where simplicity comes from, where your simplification comes from. And the other side, I think, one of the messages was, is this getting a little bit more, particularly commercially, is it getting more complex again? What was noticeable, I think, was a lack of talk about S4. S4 had been something we've been talking about for years, and now we're sort of back to business suite, focus on your business area. You can find an easy entry point, a more sort of accessible entry point. But then it does kind of get a little bit complicated with, how those that are on the new, more public cloud versions of SAP, where it's going to be monthly subscription based, and those that are on private cloud, and after all, a lot of the user base is still on premise and potentially on private cloud, and you're still looking at FUEs and how you're going to sort of join the two together, and how you're going to navigate your way to a place where you can really take advantage of the innovation that a lot of the talk is about, because for some users that is still, probably a lot of users, that is still quite a long way off.
Thank you, Emma. If I could share with you, if I may, obviously there's a lot around the flywheel, if you like, of apps, data and AI has been a central theme across the events. How do you think that resonated with attendees?
I think with a lot of attendees that I spoke to, there was a lot of conversation around, this is a nice, bold vision, but how do we get there? And I think, it's difficult for SAP, right? Because if they don't talk about the innovation, everyone's going to say, well, where was the innovation? If they talk about where people are now, they kind of feel that's a bit stuck. But when they start talking just about the innovation, then people are sort of saying, well, I want to see, a bit like you referred to, what's the evidence about how once we're there, we're actually going to see efficiencies, we're actually going to see, frictionless, moves to the cloud. How are you going to help us get there? So for a lot of people, I think there's a feeling that perhaps a large part of the user base, they're talking about things that are just not accessible to them. So, and that does represent most of the user base probably that are, the historical customers of SAP that have built it up, made it successful. And there is definitely a sense they might be left behind, when they're talking about things that might be a bit theoretical for them.
Thank you. And Dipti, what did you take away from that?
I think I would probably, whatever Emma's saying, it resonates with me. For me, the SAP's flywheel was being future ready. If I look at what they're proposing, I think it's the real need in enterprise tech. With the flywheel, SAP is making a huge commitment to its customers to make data, logic, intelligence inseparable within an ecosystem, and have the flexibility and the agility to seamlessly integrate what essentially drives business value. The iceberg analogy that they gave us was interesting, and how it's a contrast with the flywheel metaphor. And in my view, I think today the biggest challenge for enterprises is how do you bring everything together and create a very agile, flexible architecture so it's easier for you to adopt and consume newer technology. And my take from SAP's flywheel and everything I heard was it's a step towards, S4 is a step towards that dream of being able to seamlessly consume all the technology that comes by. And there is AI, agentic AI, and the move to cloud, the move on to, consuming more of the SAP technology, it essentially democratizes AI and the business process orchestration from now being very reactive to proactive.
Thank you. And Conor, if I can come to you, if I may, you mentioned earlier Joule, and Emma touched on Joule and user interface, and what we also heard about Joule being the new UI for SAP. So Joule got a lot of focus. What are your thoughts on its potential, and could it really change the day-to-day SAP experience for customers?
Yeah, I think, again, as Dipti said there, it is very futuristic. I think what SAP are trying to do is focus on business outcome. And there's a lot of discussion even within the flywheel. One of the components is that business outcome drives the flywheel. So you get the sustainable continuous improvement process. So when we're looking at Joule, from a customer perspective, what are we looking at? We want this to solve real-time business process. That it's not just a technology play, it's about a solution that can solve business problems in real time. How successful it's going to be at doing that, I think we're still waiting on the use cases, because the challenge here, I honestly believe the challenge here is not going to be the technology. The use cases themselves are robust. It's going to be the challenge around having a harmonized business process and having the data models to sustain that business process. And what's the effort going to be required to maintain all of that to get the output that Joule can potentially give? So I don't see this as being a technology problem. I see this as being an adoption problem, and how are we going to make this work? And I still think we're a long way off getting these models to work. And so that's one of the cautions. I think I've seen several of the, partners out there talking about 50, 60, 70% efficiency gains with these tools. I think Christian was more moderated with 30%, and I think 30% is reasonable. So I think it's going to be around managing expectation that this is going to be a slow evolution. The technology will come fast, but getting the results from this is going to be a much slower process than I think people are expecting.
Yeah, I think I'd add to that as well. I think there perhaps is a tendency to jump ahead to talk about the potential gains that you could make in terms of productivity, removing costs, removing error, for example, and provide a transformative experience with the UI. But there isn't a lot about the pathway to get there, because I think most of us realize there is quite a lot of work to get to the point where you can use these effectively. And I think the other thing that was perhaps missing, at least from the conversations or the presentations that I heard, is also around the sustainability of AI, because that's still a big topic. And obviously AI has got a massive footprint. So I think a lot of us are kind of thinking, well, how do we also use it responsibly? How do we work out how we can use it in a sustainable way? Because that's something I think that organizations creating AI solutions have a responsibility to address as well.
Thank you. And also there was a change, I think, or some new messaging, shall I say, around Rise and Grow. And I think you alluded to that earlier, Emma. So what do you make of the new messaging around Rise and Grow?
Yeah. It's always been a little bit esoteric, hasn't it, around Rise and Grow? But now, so my understanding now is that, Rise is for the existing customers, Grow is for your net new customers. And rather than being a destination, it's the journey, it's the pathway that gets you to the destination, which is SAP's cloud, ultimately public cloud. I mean, there was a big drive for public ERP as the way of the future. But for many of us, there are stepping stones on the way, including private ERP and a hybrid mix of SaaS, on-premise, private cloud. But yeah, I think the narrative for me now is that Rise is not something you buy. It's not a destination. It's the journey you go on, and you might do it piecemeal, and you might do it through lots of sort of different steps in your maturity, and might have to live with a bit of complexity on the way. But that's the destination that you're working towards.
Oh,
yeah,
thank
and
you.
I would kind of
Did you have
agree. Sorry, I would agree with Emma on that. I think maybe it was a bit unfortunate that SAP kept the Rise branding when people had just got to understand what Rise is, and then they rebrand it to just being, existing user base, and all of a sudden it's like, what is Rise? So we've kind of have to relearn it again. So,
Yeah.
To me, it might have been better to just use different terminology. It might have made it easier for people to consume. But I think it's a simple message. Rise is for existing customers, grows for net new customers, and it's a journey rather than a product. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks. Dipti, anything to add from you?
I would agree. It is definitely a journey, and I think the challenge that we are seeing in the businesses today is it's not a business case in itself. So I think the positioning from SAP to consume the whole technology stack to be future ready is more powerful than just Rise as a business case.
Thank you. I mean, one of the things that I was hoping to see from the keynote as well was, how SAP is demonstrating not leaving any customers behind, taking those on-premise customers you mentioned, Emma, earlier as well, to the cloud. And there was talk around reducing service costs for those organizations moving to the cloud from on-prem. Emma, do you think that came through clearly at the event?
Personally, I don't think it really did come through that clearly. And I think, to sort of pick up on what we were saying earlier, I think there's often a feeling that the enhancements are coming at the expense, and the push for cloud, for public cloud, is coming at the expense of the traditional user base, perhaps, who do feel that they're not being given or offered enough guidance, support, and commercial leverage as well to sort of build the business case. And quite often, they might be building a business case on top of an investment they've just made to get to S4, for example, or to move to a hyperscaler. And I think that those customers, and I know this because I feel this myself in my position, are facing quite a number of hurdles, financial hurdles, operational and technical hurdles. You're dealing with rising maintenance costs, instability perhaps in the system, a feeling of lack of confidence around the support as you're on age systems, dealing with technical debt, and you're then missing the innovation opportunities that are being touted and everyone's talking about, and either facing or having passed maintenance deadlines as well. So I didn't really get very strong answers or messages from Sapphire that those customers are being really looked after, or we've got pathways for you. So I mean, that's not to say that wouldn't happen if you had the conversations individually with your account execs, but I don't think it was a strong message in the showcase.
Thanks. Conor,
I would tend to agree. For me, I think Sapphire this year was around selling the dream, what the future might look like. I think Connect is about sharing the reality, and I think that's where the two complement each other, in that, when you go to Connect, you hear about how challenging and how difficult it is to make some of these transformational moves. And we hear the good stories, and we hear the not so good stories. But for me, I would say if you were an ECC customer at Sapphire, I think you'd have gone away disappointed. I don't think you'd have heard anything. If you're S4 on-prem, you're probably going, okay, well, which part of this tech can I get access to? Because it wasn't quite clear. So, and even coming away from it, even we had a BTP conference in Dublin last week, and there was even confusion around, okay, within the new data model, within the flywheel, within SAP Business, Business Data Cloud, if you're pushing your data from S4 on-prem into the data cloud, can you use Joule? So even still, it's confusing as to what tech you can use, when you can use, how you can use it, because the tech stack is changing so rapidly that this notion that you can only use Joule if you're on Rise, seems to have maybe is not as strong as it was, say, 12 months ago. So I think, to me, there's still a lot of confusion around the stack and what parts of it we can use.
And I think that confusion's echoed even when you talk to SAP. I think the sales teams often struggle themselves to articulate what offerings you can and can't have, because it keeps changing and because they're announcing more partnerships as well and more commercial complexity. So I think that's also a factor that's adding to the confusion.
On that move from on-prem to the cloud, do you think there's a sense of urgency among customers to move now, or is it still a very much a wait-and-see approach for many? Dipti, do you have anything to say on that?
I think, in my view, there isn't a sense of urgency in terms of SAP's support for ECC finishing at a particular date, because we've seen SAP's constantly kind of move that in the future. So from that perspective, no. And I think businesses were taking a view like SAP does not mandate what and how we run our technology stack or how we run our businesses. However, the ecosystem around us and the pace of change in the new world of technology is kind of mandating the move to cloud. And therefore, businesses are increasingly seeing the move to cloud or moving on to RISE more of a necessity to be able to consume and get the most value for their own business. So they can consume the newer technologies. They can upgrade their, in a lot of organizations like ours, we are, 100 years old, more than 100 years old. And for us to change the technology at the right pace doesn't happen overnight. So I think that's the approach that most organizations, at least what I'm seeing around us, are taking. That it's the need of the hour.
Thank you.
We know our community, but we don't know yours yet. Why not share the benefits of your UKISUG membership with those who don't know about us? The UKISUG referral scheme rewards you for helping to grow and develop our community. You can check out the link in the description to find out more about how you can get involved. Terms and conditions apply. We hope you enjoy the rest of the podcast.
And just moving away from, I suppose, the big messages now from the keynotes, etc., and maybe get under the covers a bit more of Sapphire to really look at that real value from an SAP customer perspective. So, Emma, if I may ask you, what did you find most useful beyond the big keynotes?
Well, these events are always really useful for just the kind of conversations that you have in the exhibition hall, talking to the suppliers, talking to other customers, and that extends into the evening events, not just during the day. But one of the things that was so useful for us and really kind of, I think, enabled us to amplify our value as a user group and as a board for our members was the opportunity to talk to the management team level of SAP. And that, that's an opportunity that's not afforded to sort of, every Sapphire goer, and was incredibly useful, I think, to really talk about some of the more complex parts of these keynotes. As we've sort of talked about in this conversation, sometimes the keynotes are a little bit high level. They're not entirely clear. They are a little bit, marketing speak. And to be able to go into the nuances of it and drill down with that senior level of leadership with SAP was incredibly, incredibly useful. And obviously we talked about having follow-on conversations from that we perhaps wouldn't have even thought about the topic if we hadn't had that dialogue with SAP. So I know we're going to have some follow-up conversations to understand more about pricing, to understand more about the RISE journey and also some of these challenges for on-premise customers as well.
Thank you. Dipti?
I would completely agree with Emma. Definitely, the keynote and everything is at a very high level. But the opportunity to meet SAP's leadership and be the voice of the customer, I think, was very valuable. For us as a user community to represent our customers and talk about some real challenges. For example, licensing. It's the most complex way of engaging with SAP. So that definitely, I had similar takeaways. The other piece was around, I think, which most of us will agree, is the human connection and the human story behind every single transformation. Having those candid conversations around what really works and what doesn't work, and what can we influence as the user community for better impact, be it driving the business forward, productivity, sustainability. I think those, to me, they always stay with me. And then quite often you kind of walk through the corridors and you meet someone who you haven't seen for like 10, 15 years. And I think that was great. The other piece which was useful was the customer roundtables. So sometimes SAP gives you the opportunity on, if you're kind of looking at particular pieces of technology, to have these conversations, closed door, Chatham rules, speak to other customers, and, you get to see what's happening under the hood, what have been the significant breakthroughs they have had with various SAP technologies, and equally what their challenges have been. So, yeah. All in all, came back as a powerhouse of ideas buzzing.
Thank you both for that. And I mean, I suppose from that perspective, big shout out to SAP's Global User Group Office for organising that user group agenda with the leaderships. I think that is a very vital piece. And, moving over to the other side of the pond, if you like, where Conor and I were in Orlando, and you just touched there on human connections, both of you meeting people, and I met a lady called Jane Gray who I used to work with at SAP over 10 years ago, and I haven't seen her for 10 years. She lives in Manchester. I live in Teesside, so we're literally 2 hours away from each other. And I bump into her in Orlando. It's just absolute madness. But Conor, from your perspective, the real value outside of the keynotes, obviously on the other side of the pond at the Orlando event.
Yeah, so obviously for me it was a different experience, Emma and Dipti. But our connection at this one was with the ASUG, with the American User Group. And on the Monday, we got to spend the day with their executive forum, meeting a kind of cross-section of industry leaders as we talked through various challenges. And again, what was really interesting is the challenges we face in UK and Ireland, very similar to the challenges that are being faced with our US counterparts. So it was a really great chance to connect with the American User Group. We also got the chance to meet with our German colleagues, our DSI colleagues, and a few more of the user groups. So just, again, it's all about connection. It's all about the stories. I think having been in Barcelona last year, to me, kind of similar scale. I think Orlando in the past was much bigger, but, it's kind of similar scale. So it was really good to be there, but looking forward to back in Europe next year.
Yeah, it's really good. And it does, that connections with other user groups as well, because obviously out in Orlando, we were engaging with Japanese user group, the Australian user group, German user group, and the Americas user group. So Mexico user group, there's lots of different ways on both sides that, we can engage with our colleagues from around the world, which is excellent. And, one kind of just going back to, we were talking about simplification. We were talking about business value, business outcomes driving the flywheel. And one comment kind of stood out, I think, from the keynote as well around about that business element, around IT teams facing pressure from increasingly demanding business leaders. Now, does that reflect your own experience, Conor? But you're sitting on the business side as well now.
Yeah, so I spent 15, 16 years on the IT side, the last 5 years on the business side, and I can certainly see it from both perspectives. I think one of the interesting data points Jan Gillick gave, I think, on day 2 of Sapphire was that, back in the year 2000, companies ran about 10 applications, and in 2025, companies are running about 600 applications. And most of the IT budget is consumed just keeping the lights on and keeping these all integrated and keeping these working. So when it comes to innovation, we as business users, we're looking for stuff today. Sometimes we're looking for it yesterday, and we're not really that interested in the complexity of how you get there. We just, again, probably sold the dream by the software supplier or by a consultancy organization that says, hey, you can achieve this value very, very quickly. And in some cases you can, and in some cases you can't. And I think with the advent of cloud technology and software as a service, the businesses are much more likely to go out and buy stuff, install it, run it, and then come to IT at the end and say, hey guys, can you plug this into your backend for us and give us some data? So I think so I think there's two things. I think I think the business needs to understand that it is a little bit more complex than just plugging in data. But I think as well on the IT side, there probably has to be a move towards application simplification. Is trying to rationalize the volume of applications we have and spend more time focusing on business process outcome and process efficiency than maybe trying to get the best of breed software integrated and connected all the time. Sometimes from a business perspective, perfection is the enemy of good. We don't need the best of breed of everything. Sometimes being just good enough is actually good enough. So it's finding that balance between speed to value and putting in the perfect solution.
Thank you. And Dipti, anything to add?
I think I would just add, you need two to do a tango, and it's a constant challenge. The business and the tech are always both trying to do the best for the organization, but it's challenging. The way forward, and no matter how cliche it sounds, is aiming for true partnership and collaboration. I think a relationship anchored in trust will go a long way. For the business to start understanding what it takes to run the technology stack, and like Conor said, it's really hard for the tech organizations to find something at the back end and then try to integrate them and provide all the insights and the analytics. So the business, just have to recognize that the reality is SAP is our books. It is our records of it is the record of transaction for our organization, and therefore that follows the governance and everything that has to go with it. So building that trust can go a long way, and equally for the tech organization to be more value focused to drive productivity and growth, and be creative essentially to make things happen for our business.
Thank you. And Emma, I don't know whether you have anything to add around perhaps what organisations can do to ensure their SAP goals remain realistic.
Yeah, I think realism is important, as you say, and I think, as Conor said, they quite often we get sold the dream at a lot of these events and with a lot of marketing, and I think it is. I definitely feel the pressure of IT teams to keep up with the pace of change that the business wants, the pace of innovation that the business wants. And really what we want to do, I think, is remove the long pipeline to that kind of realizing that kind of change by simplifying, by increasing self-service. But it is difficult to do if you're not already on cloud, if you're not already standard, if you haven't cleaned up your core. So I think, a lot of organizations are still in that phase where they're really looking at how can they clean up their act to create the right platform to enable the fast innovation to come. Because until you've done that, you're really you've got a battle on your hands to make sure that you can not just roll it out swiftly, but roll it out and get the right results as well. So I think, that kind of comes back to that message that we started talking about near the beginning, that, we just need organizations like SAP to help organizations more, to give them the pathway to how they get to the right foundation so that they can then switch on this innovation.
Thank you. And I know it's certainly a big challenge we see across our membership, and one of the big projects we're working with SAP on in the UK and Ireland is around bringing IT and business closer together, because that shift to the cloud is changing the complete face of the IT team and department and their roles. So it is something we're certainly looking to work on, and thank you all for that. And if I can just stay with you a second, Emma, what are you hearing perhaps more broadly from UKISUG members post Sapphire? Are there any emerging patterns in terms of cloud adoption, innovation, or challenges perhaps?
I think there is still a lot of talk about the hype. I think there is, the hype being around agentic AI, frictionless migration to the cloud. And I think there's a bit of frustration because people are finding it is hard, particularly in the S4 community that we work with. A lot of them are still building the business case for S4, or they have just made a transition to S4. So they've already made quite a significant investment. I think, what we're not perhaps doing so well, and this is the drive that you talked about, Craig, is getting the join up between the business outcomes and the tech team, so that they're because I think increasingly it is difficult to separate them out. We need a very IT enabled workforce, a digital workforce in the future. That's going to come. And I think the closer we get towards that, then the easier the whole journey is going to be. But at the moment, what I feel is there's still a little bit of separation, and that's why the user group is going to be so important, I think, in bringing those two themes together and making sure that people understand their common goals.
Thank you. And Conor, are you hearing anything from members at all?
Yeah, I think similar to what Emma said there's still a frustration around the business case in terms of the move to S4. And I think, again, in terms of just the agentic AI and the AI platforms, just hearing the stories, I think there's a real appetite out there now to, a bit like I think when we went with Rise initially, everyone's waiting for a customer to stand up on the stage at Connect and talk about their Rise journey, and then it becomes real. So I think everybody's waiting, even in the BTP forum in Crow Park this week. Everyone's still waiting for that big story. Who's going to come up and say, we deployed this agentic AI solution and we literally knocked it out of the park. The results are just absolutely outstanding, and it has transformed our business. So these are the stories we need to match the hype. So the hype is high, and I think we shared the Gartner's hype cycle last week. We're at the peak of inflated expectations right now with agentic AI. It's right at the top. So that's what we're hearing from our members as well. There's a disconnect between the promise and the reality at the moment.
So let's help and push and drive that reality and get some stories out there. That's a challenge we'll take on heading to Connect in November, as you mentioned earlier. Okay, as we come towards perhaps a close in our conversation now, if I can just come to each of you, if I may. Interesting question, I suppose. If you had to give SAP one piece of advice based on your Sapphire experience this year, what would it be? And if we can start with you on this, Conor.
Okay. I think one of the things I would do if I was running SAP is Signavio, LeanIX, and WalkMe. I would give them free to the customers, because if you want to drive innovation, and if you want to drive business adoption, and if you want to drive that customers to the cloud and be able to use all this new technology, these are the core tools to do it. And if you're going to charge for them, which commercially I can understand why they want to charge for them, but if you want to charge them, you're putting a barrier in the middle of innovation. And companies are hard pressed to spin software. And it's very hard sometimes to get the business case together for another set of software. So if it was me, I would make those tools available free of charge for all the customers and train them up on how to drive innovation using these technologies.
Thank you. I love the word SAP solutions and free in the same sentence. Absolutely adore it. Emma.
I would say clarify the complex commercial structure, because technical complexity we can talk about all day long. And if you want innovation, and we're all on different platforms and we've all got different setups, then you're going to have technical complexity. But really helping customers to understand and helping the sales teams to articulate the commercial structure, I think, is really, really crucial.
That's very interesting. So I was having a conversation around AI and agents, and when you see a lot of the demos from SAP, it often comes at the end. There were 7 agents involved in this discussion. So what is the licensing on that? Are you paying 7 different times for every time they get involved in it? So simplification, I would stand by that. And Dipti, the final words to you.
I think for me, I also had a few things to ask from SAP as offered as part of their core offerings in products. SAP hasn't been the most intuitive, and therefore the user experience and user adoption has not always been where it should be to meet the business needs. So if SAP can make Joule with Perplexity, which was the AI-powered answer engine they talked about in the partnership with Perplexity, and I am myself a user of Perplexity, and I gain a lot out of it. If they can make that happen and embed that in every single app, and it just comes off the shelf for us to consume as part of our license, then it's like having an expert on your speed dial everywhere and anywhere.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you all very much. Emma, Dipti, Conor, thank you. Thank you for your time and your insights. And from discussing this with you, there's been so much to unpack. There's so much we didn't have the opportunity to touch on, which really says to me that if you are an SAP customer and you do have the opportunity, there's a lot to gain by going to Sapphire. So bear that in mind. And also, as been mentioned a couple of times on this, look out for UKISUG Connect coming to you at the end of November, where we will bring that real story to you and for you at that event. So thank you very much for listening. We hope you enjoyed the conversation and found it valuable. Please make sure you do subscribe so you don't miss any of our future episodes. And until the next time, stay safe, stay well, and stay connected.